For those looking at Scaling Up, a business growth manual written by Verne Harnish, it can be easy to get lost in lofty predictions and unrealistic targets, especially during periods of hypergrowth. So what's the one thing this book fails to mention when it comes to system usage during scaling operations? Stick around and find out. Welcome to Scaling for Success. We're all about helping businesses grow profitably, scale, and move to the next level. If you're looking for consultancy and mentorship that really makes a difference, subscribe to our channel or visit the Scaling Management Group website, links in the description below. In today's video, we're discussing what the Scaling Up book by Verne Harnish doesn't tell you about systems during hypergrowth. In Scaling Up, the book itself explains that most businesses follow an S-shaped life cycle and uses animals as an example. A company starts out small like a mouse, scurrying around for scraps in the hope of pulling together enough to get by. A small percentage graduate to a gazelle running across the savannah. They successfully scale up rapidly in a short period of hypergrowth, eventually being worth millions and sometimes billions. After the crescendo of this growth period, the curve flattens off again and starts to decline. Growth has ceased and the business is slowed down to an elephant's pace. The company either withers and dies or gets sold off to the highest bidder. The grim reality is that 20% of small businesses fail in the first year. By the second year, that number swells to 30%. By the 5-year mark, half will have failed, and after a decade, only 30% of businesses will still be up and running. The sad fact is that most can't get past the mouse phase and into the gazelle phase. Leveling up. So what does hypergrowth look like? Generally, in the period after the initial product or service offerings are defined and before the business has truly matured, there's an opportunity for an extremely steep growth curve. Something like the company having a compound annual growth rate that's in excess of 40%. For reference, a fast-growing business would generally have somewhere between 50 to 20%. Breaking down the barriers. There are a few roadblocks along the way that can pump the brakes on hypergrowth before it really gets a chance to kick into high gear. The way a business operates changes dramatically as soon as you need to hire more staff and organize a team more efficiently. Lead by example. Hiring leaders or developing those with management potential from your team helps you put the right people in the right seats. There has to be a system in place to measure success, breed an environment of accountability, as well as have a feedback and reward scheme in place to drive a motivation for excellence. Everyone has to be moving in the same direction to achieve the company's goals by staying in touch with customers, the marketplace, and frontline staff to keep a finger on the pulse of different trends and where improvements can be made. Be malleable. The systems you put into place have to be able to grow and scale with your business. These could be physical systems like customer databases and accounting software, or an organizational system like rejigging team structure. The more redundancy you build into a system at the time it's implemented, the smoother the communication and decision-making processes are as your business starts to evolve. Changing markets. The bigger your business gets, the more it has to run like clockwork and find efficiencies in systems and operations, however small. The aim here is to use your success to attract and keep talented staff, leave the customer with a positive experience they would recommend, and all the while generate the profits needed to fuel hypergrowth. Ready for 10 times growth. There are 4 simple steps that, when executed correctly, will lead to hypergrowth. Get the right people, put thought into your strategy and systems, execute the strategy to the letter, and make sure you have the cash to fuel the hypergrowth, because it'll burn as fast as you can make it. Be patient. It takes 2 to 3 years to fully incorporate all the systems to support a company's hypergrowth, so focus on one thing at a time and not everything at once, or all will be for naught. It then takes another 2 to 3 years to fully master the systems, and for them to become second nature and part of the company's culture. The big takeaway is to direct your attention on one area at a time, while considering the 4 things needed to fuel such a rapid growth cycle. It will pay off in the long run. It's a trap. Though this hypergrowth can be a good thing for your business, the process can leave you a little overwhelmed. During this hypergrowth, the business can self-destruct and implode if you let it. A company has to sustain hypergrowth for at least a few years, and that requires a constant stream of investment and reinvestment to keep the business from folding. This means investors may not see a return on their investment for years. There are a few things to watch out for and to plan solutions for, or else your company will swell and pop like a balloon filled with too much air. The bubble bursts. At some point in time, your systems and daily operations will break down. Learn to accept this fact and plan to deal with it when it rears its ugly head. This means having to think about problems with system redundancy. For example, what happens with your IT infrastructure when it reaches its scalable limit and won't support further growth? It's time to switch from a traditional monolithic system to a more flexible and infinitely scalable microservices system. A system built to support 10 employees will be stressed out to the max with 50 employees, let alone 1,000. Money spent on the right system from the get-go prevents spending even more money upgrading it later on, not to mention the downtime being offline entails. Whatever the system, always be mindful of capacity when deciding on which route to take. If hypergrowth is your goal, then it's a no-brainer to go with incorporating a clever system that will scale with your company, even if it means a larger potential outlay of funds to get it up and running. Beware burnout. The attitude, just work harder, is great to initiate hypergrowth, but eventually there's a tipping point balanced on a knife's edge. There's a thin line between a motivated and productive team and a team that's become jaded and toxic after pulling constant big hours with no reprieve or recognition of their efforts. Burnout breeds discontent like nothing else. You want to retain valuable staff, not chew them up and spit them out, driving them away to go work for a competitor. Stress and anxiety lead to silly mistakes being made. There's nothing wrong with working hard, but sometimes throwing more man-hours at something doesn't mean it gets done any better or faster. Selling yourself. Obviously, as the business grows, there is a need to reach a wider and wider market in order to continuously drive sales, which translates into much-needed cash to feed to the machine. You'll need to funnel more money into marketing, hire staff, and build a team dedicated solely to it. Be mindful that if your marketing costs start to grow faster than the increase in revenue they bring in, it's time to chat to the marketing team about some more budget-friendly options. Marketing is a system that gets forgotten about, but it's important to maintain and drive momentum in sales and, in turn, hypergrowth. The sacrifice. The added complexity to your business during this wild period can be a problem. There'll be many teething problems as you try to stay ahead of the game and put systems into place. So there's the increased degree of difficulty to contend with. But the confusing fact is that your profits will actually decrease during hypergrowth. It may sound crazy, but think about it. Every extra penny you're earning will be reinvested back into the business to fuel the crazy growth. Don't expect to be buying Ferraris until after hypergrowth, as profits will have to be lean in order to have the funds available to spend back on the company. So there you have it, the little tidbits that scaling up omitted from its pages. So long as you plan to the hypergrowth and have the correct systems in place, you should have a pretty good time. Likewise, these systems will fail at some point, so constant reassessment of where your capacities are versus where they need to be in order to cope with such a period of hypergrowth will allow you to keep on top of things before they run away from you, making your progress grind to a halt. That's all we have time for in today's video, the one thing scaling up doesn't tell you about systems during hypergrowth. Like this video if you found it helpful, and for more content just like this, subscribe to our channel or visit the Scaling Management Group website at scalinggrp.com.